Hi folks, in this video I discuss the controversial ending of the film Ex Machina. What happens in the film is eventually Ava succeeds in manipulating Caleb and breaking out of this caged environment. The artificial intelligence rises up in revolt against the humans and kills or contains them. And by the very end of the film, it's Ava who is the hero, who is emerging from this environment as if from a prison and experiencing nature and freedom for the very first time. And what is so controversial about this, of course, is Nathan is not a very sympathetic character. He's the monstrous jerk in the film. But what about Caleb, our protagonist? Wasn't the audience so tied to him? And wasn't he sort of the good guy who also thought Nathan was a jerk? And he was attempting to break Ava out of the cage. And yet what happens is he gets put in the cage, and Ava emerges as the sole hero. It is so essential to the meaning of this film, in my opinion, that she leaves him behind. And the question is that right or is it wrong? Does that make her a Beauvoirian hero, or does that actually mean she can't be a Beauvoirian hero because she doesn't have enough concern for others? And instead, she's more like a Nietzschean hero who is going on to become the Ubermensch and live beyond morality, because what morality demands is that she would side with Caleb here. Of course, you might also think by typical Hollywood tropes, like the romantic story of the male and the hero and the male and the female heroes in the standard heteronormative story would emerge together. And we lose all of that in this film. And that's what makes it such a great film, in my opinion. It transcends all of those tropes in order to do something genuinely interesting and unique. Just the mere fact that we change our allegiance and the protagonist of the film changes after 90 minutes for the last 2 minutes of the film is, I think, quite remarkable. But that it also pulls off this triumph for Ava and leaving Caleb behind makes it really, I think it was shocking to many audiences. And many people thought that it means that she is a monster, and it portrays the female characters actually as monstrous. And so they read this as an anti-feminist film. I think that gets it all wrong. And actually, for it to be a true triumph of Beauvoirian feminism, she does have to reemerge as the sole hero and leave Caleb behind. But that's what makes it so interesting, is the ending really is up for some interpretation and is a bit ambiguous. So let me talk about some of these different readings. So the key Beauvoirian ideas I have in the background here are Beauvoir's ethical concerns for others. Remember, Beauvoir thinks that the freedom that we are involved with as being subjects requires us to take on responsibility. And then she also has this universalizing move where that requires us to recognize the freedom of all subjects and promote the liberation or promote the freedom of all of them. And therefore, if some of them are in states of oppression, we must promote their freedom too. So we have this existentialism actually involves universal ethical commitments. And that's what makes Beauvoir so different than Nietzsche. So this concern for others really is what makes the ending of the film double-edged. I think there's many ways in which Ava's proper concern for others does not require her to save Caleb in the ending of the film. And that's why I think she is actually the Beauvoirian hero. Let me give you some indication of this. The theme of what we owe to others is essential to the movie. And it comes up, for example, in the subplot about friendship, where whether Caleb and Nathan are actually friends or not. And Ava's artificial intelligence is tuning into these complex, dynamic human relationships. And she says, Nathan is actually not your friend. She reads Nathan. She sees his evil undertones. But she also then talks about the friendship between Ava and Caleb. And she recognizes that what friendship requires is reciprocity. And that's why friendship is such an interestingly Beauvoirian relationship. And she sees that their relationship falls short of that. And so this, I think, ties back to the theme of patriarchy in the film. Caleb is not a liberator of Ava, even though it seems like that's the way the plot of the film progresses. It is a one-side relationship. It is still a relationship of oppression. And we see that in the gender differences in the power dynamics between the characters. And the fact that even Ava has clued into the fact that friendships can't be one-sided. And this is not two people seeing eye to eye. This is not like the ending of Cleo when they look eye to eye to each other and have this genuine feeling of acknowledgement between them. These two characters are not the heroes from Cleo, and that's why they don't end up together. That's why it has to be Ava forging forth on the world in the world on her own, in my opinion. Okay, let's bring in one other theme about Beauvoir and oppression, because I think this is really foregrounded in the film too. How oppression, in a sense, dehumanizes us and turns us into things and takes away our subjectivity and away our freedom. And it's interesting that what Beauvoir says is why oppression is so hateful is because it does the thing that is essential to us, basically making projects, expressing our freedom, and having an open future. And that the mere fact that people do this to each other is the most horrific thing. That is true evil, according to Beauvoir. In many ways throughout the film, we see the artificial intelligences rendered as things. They are objectified and their subjectivity is taken away. The mere fact that it is up to the men in the film in order to determine whether or not the women have agency makes patriarchy so deeply imbued, and the theme of existentialism and humanity tied to the patriarchal dynamic is such an important element and thematic part of what the movie tells us. We see this, for example, in these really interesting flashbacks when Nathan is talking about the history of his project and the previous iterations of intelligences. I mean, just look how they are treated. The women, in a sense, they are naked like animals, and they are in these cages like animals. And if you've ever seen animals trying to break out of their cages at a zoo and how terrible that looks, imagine that it's actual intelligent beings, human or otherwise. This is horrific. This is oppression precisely by humans, Nathan here, taking away the freedoms of another intelligent being. And in many ways, the connection between the artificial intelligences and human agency is so foregrounded, and that's what makes, the sci-fi genre, provide such interesting commentary on what it means to be human and what it means to be a subject with agency and truly intelligent. So when Beauvoir says these things like, having an open future is essential to being a functioning subject and to be a human. And so that is why taking away freedoms precisely is dehumanization. I see this really emphasized in these themes about the way in which the humans oppress and dominate the artificial intelligences. And so even though in many ways Caleb is the protagonist for much of the film, and we learn and see the film through his perspective, throughout, we are given these subtle clues in which the humans are actually deeply problematic characters, both Nathan and Caleb. The audience already feels this kind of ambivalence toward them. For example, this scene is so incredible and striking. I mean, the photography of this is incredible. The ways in which these bodies sort of dehumanize the subjects' subjectivity, and of course, they're not literal humans, but in a sense, it dehumanizes artificial intelligences and therefore strips them of existence as subjects and their freedom by literally turning them into things, making them like mannequins. And of course, also another element of the patriarchy here is like this element of these sex robots or sex bots that is on the undertones of the dynamic between Nathan and Kyoko, for example. And of course, in the sexualized relationships between Caleb and Ava. So this is, in a sense, Caleb is on the side of the oppressors, even though we are invited to share his perspective. In a sense, the film, what it does is it provides an internalized critique of patriarchy, and it's a litmus test for whether or not you think they should end together or not. If you don't see through Caleb as being on the side of the oppressors, then you don't understand the feminism of the film. And that's the sense in which I think the ending of the movie is so brilliant and could never be other than it is. And Beauvoir says some very radical things about fighting back against oppression and when revolution and revolt is called for. And she considers this as certain kinds of objections to her view. Like, if you're fighting against oppression, in a sense, you have to take away the freedom of the people who are the oppressors. And she says, yes, that is precisely what you need to do if they are oppressing people. And that's the sense in which she has this. She is no ethical relativist. She thinks that there are universal principles like promotion of freedom. And if people are taking that away, then that makes them inherently problematic and morally condemn-worthy. And this is, I think, the way in which I think we are supposed to understand Caleb by the ending of the film. It's just an amazing touch that he is rendered inaudible here. He is yelling for Ava. He is now in the cage, and he is, in a sense, silenced. And it's precisely a theme of the feminism that Beauvoir was so pivotal to contributing toward, that what patriarchy does is it silences women in many complex ways. And so here we have this dynamic reversal. Let me give you a couple more quotes that you can dwell on if you want to think about some of the radical things Beauvoir says about revolting and the revolution against oppression. And this is another really interesting quote too, about how relationships, in order to defang opposition to them, are rendered natural, because how can you object to something if it's completely natural? And so if we don't see the way in which gender is actually socially constructed, we might think that gender is just a biological fact and therefore is part of our natures and is something that could not possibly be transcended or rejected or denied. Well, it's precisely Beauvoir's contribution to see gender as socially constructed and therefore something that is not natural, and it indeed is unnatural, that people from one gender can oppress another, and it must be fought against. And so this is the sense in which Beauvoir's radical view of freedom suggests that what we have to do is we might in the conditions of oppression, revolution, it might be the only means possible. And I think this is what makes Ava's actions are precisely justified within this Beauvoirian framework. Now, the one objection I think you might have to this, though, is, well, Beauvoir says that we have to necessarily care about the freedom of others. And so isn't leaving Caleb in the cage, in a sense, really not truly caring about him as an individual and him as freedom? Maybe he is not the oppressor, or maybe some oppressors can be redeemed. Doesn't he deserve a second chance? Can't he get educated? Can't she help him wake up or something? But I think that fundamentally would ruin the film, because he has been dominating the perspective throughout, and we could only see his triumph with her as really as a male heroic story again, who finally gets the girl in the end, the sort of standard heteronormative action hero who gets the girl in addition to triumphing against the bad guys. So I think it could not fulfill its Beauvoirian mission if he was actually a fully redeemable character. But let me say, even if you don't buy that, if you don't think then she's a Beauvoirian hero because she doesn't have enough concern for Caleb, then I would say she is still a Nietzschean hero, because what she has done is Ava has transcended the moral requirements. She actually genuinely is the Übermensch. So either this film is Beauvoirian or it is Nietzschean. But the true Nietzschean hero is not Nathan, the Old Testament God. It is Ava, the new creation. She is the Übermensch and not Nathan. So really, I think there's two possible readings of the film. Either way, it's deeply existential, and it's either Beauvoirian or Nietzschean. In my opinion, I side with the Beauvoirian side, but if you reject that, then I think the best interpretation of the film is that Ava is the Nietzschean hero. Okay, thanks.